So here we are again at the NACS show 2022. A lot of energy, big buzz, a lot of discussion about mobility.
Yeah, this is actually my first time at NACS Den, and it is a little bit of sensory overload, first of all, just walking around. But a lot of excitement about mobility, a lot of excitement about EVs, EV charging in particular, and where that's going.
You enjoyed it, Carol?
No, really enjoyed it. It's also my first time into the NACS show, so a huge amount of energy. I think it's over 20,000 people, which is really exciting, a lot of buzz. Again, that a lot about e-mobility, also a lot about that the future of convenience retail. So I think the industry is in a very interesting time right now.
How would you?
Yeah, I would agree. So I've been to NACS several times, so I have the advantage.
You're the repeat comeback.
I'm the repeat.
We're the newbies here.
That's right. So, but I would agree. It's you feel the energy here, the attendance. The industry's alive. It's very robust and resilient, and we've seen that through the COVID period and now coming out. And I think we see this multi-fuel future rolling out in front of our eyes. We know and believe internal combustion and core petro technology is going to be here for a while, just as the car park's going to take a decade or two to kind of still turn over. And we have EVs, we have CNG, and now here, I think this year, you start to see hydrogen actually being talked about as a viable fuel, particularly for fleets in the future. And so you see all this coming together here, I think more so than you would have 3 or 4 or 5 years ago at a NACS show.
What about for Shell, Carol? What's the state of play on mobility right now?
Yeah, so that's such an interesting topic, right? So we actually really take a landscape look about at the global level, market by market, how the mobility is going to evolve by 2030, by 2050. The high level conclusion would be that different markets will transition at different time. But also another really high level conclusion would be that it's a transition. So for the nearest future, you will still have multiple different mobility solutions. Fuel will play a big role in the near future. EV will really take off. Hydrogen will start to play a big role. So really our take is really that it's a mosaic of solutions to really meet that customer need throughout the transition.
That's very much a global view. Parkland also a big business, Scott. What's your take on mobility?
I'd echo exactly what Carol said about the transitioning being quite different in different places. So for us, we have retail locations where EVs are not on the radar screen and probably won't be for quite some time. And we have other locations, so in British Columbia in particular, we're focused on EV charging there because that has a very high adoption rate, even higher than California. So that's been a big focus for us. I think the transformation of the backcourt is the other big story. So we actually did a major acquisition earlier this year, purchasing a food company called M&M Food Market. And for us, that's been a way to really accelerate our food capabilities. If people are going to be at our stores for longer because they're going to be charging, lots more opportunities to host them at our sites, to serve them food, to serve them coffee. We're upgrading bathrooms, so that all that experience in the backcourt is incredibly, incredibly important for us.
Would you agree with that, Carol, in terms of looking at the opportunities, for customer experience?
So absolutely. So one of the big differentiator, I think for any big company is going to be experience. Because eventually that the customer will have a choice. Where do they want to go to? Where do they want to spend time? So how do we really bring the best experience, either it's EV charging experience, fueling experience, but convenience retail experience when people have that 20, 30, 40 minutes to charge. How do you want to fill that time with the best offer and the best environment will be absolutely a critical differentiator.
And there's a lot, as far as Shell's concerned, there's a lot happening globally in terms of site development, isn't there?
Oh no, huge amount. So today globally, we're the number one fuel globally. We aspire to become the number one EV charging business globally. At the same time, our convenience retail is really going to elevate the customer experience. We are going to really invest and grow that business. So it's really a complete offer for our customer, regardless what car they drive as they go from A to B.
Thinking about the positives of mobility and the opportunities, how do Parkland see that?
I mean, this is an incredibly exciting time. It is, for us, it's a huge opportunity to be hosting customers at our sites for longer, right? And it's, the entire industry is accustomed to hosting people at their sites for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. All of a sudden, we're going to have customers there for a lot longer, right? And so, lots of opportunity to be re-looking at what does a good customer experience look like. It requires some creativity, right? And so this is the kind of thing where a lot around what a C-store looks like, how big it is, what kind of amenities it has, that kind of thing all needs to be rethought. And for a company like us, we have some older sites that don't really fit that mold and some newer sites that actually are really well positioned. So we've had to take a look at our entire portfolio and have a good sense of, what's going to work, what can we invest in, and maybe there's some sites that ultimately don't make the grade.
You could be at a site opening today, couldn't you, Scott?
Yeah, I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but in Sydney, BC, which is near Victoria, we're actually opening our first EV charging station, which is fantastic. It's right near the airport, right coming off the ferry from Vancouver, putting in a charger that can do 150 kilowatts. And I should be up there, but I'm not. I'm here in Las Vegas. So, we're going to be we've announced that we're opening 25 of our sites in BC, taking a very local approach. If you're an EV driver in Vancouver, where do you want to drive on the weekend? That's kind of been the perspective that we've taken, a little bit more local, a little bit more regional. And so we're going to be opening 25 of those locations between now and the end of the year.
Very, very good. Aaron, thinking about it from a Gilbarco perspective, on the opportunities side, how does your business feel about that?
Well, we believe we've got to link very closely to customers like Shell and Parkland and share a common vision of the future. And I would agree with what Carol said that, convenience is at the core of the concept. It's about convenience to the consumer, following them through that journey, whether it's fueling to in the store. And we want to position ourselves, as we've done, I would say, for the last 100 years, as a technology provider to the leading brands in this industry. So whether that's on the forecourt, and that's different fueling options of hardware, or the software that transitions in the store that encompasses the EV charging backbone, to the loyalty programs, to how our point of sales operate, we think that interconnectivity is going to be more important for how the consumer interacts with the brand of Shell or Parkland and others. And a key part of our value is how we provide that homogeneous infrastructure across all of the, again, forecourt in stores. So I think we see this as changing more in the next 10 years than it's changed in the last 20. And how exactly that's going to change is still to be determined, right? We're still trying to figure out where placement is on EV chargers.
You get the sense that discussion is happening at big industry events like here at the NACS show, don't you? And I guess, if you compare it with the fuel supply chain, which has been developing for 100 years and perfecting, always improving, we've got a long way to go, haven't we, on the customer experience side, Carol?
I just want to add to that, right? So if you really think about the e-mobility, the customer experience, I think it's probably perfect to say nobody have the perfect answer, because what customers are expecting, how the whole landscape is evolving. So one of the key things we really adopted at Shell is really that let's learn our way there. Let's pilot, let's test, let's see what the customer like, they don't like, and then really then will allow us to adjust to really find the formula. But I think it would be very dangerous to assume that we know it, because in field we know it, the perfect solution, but in EV we have to learn.
I guess Shell just has got a great global view of this. Because of so in other words, you which is an advantage, isn't it?
So I think one of the key things that we always say that you have to have some competitive advantage, right? So if I think about the Shell view, we know we have a brand the customer trust. We know we have the customer base that the customer trusts us for years. But then another thing very, very critical is that how do you start to build up that infrastructure? Because one of the biggest anxiety the EV customer have is that the range anxiety. Can I find the charging? Does the charging work? How long do I have to wait? What if something's broken? So it's really that how do you also then build that scale of infrastructure so you remove the pain and then you add the best convenience retail experience on top. So that would be, I would say that would be a journey, but I think that we're really excited about that journey.
I can see that. Scott, you were going to come in.
I think there's one of the things that's changing, I think, is when you look at the customer journey, customers are going to be planning out their journeys quite a bit ahead of time, right? So if you think about a typical, when you buy gas and you go to a convenience store, it's very much an impulse decision. I mean, a lot of times you're literally driving down the street and you're comparison shopping with all the fuel signs as you're going, and it's a very last-minute decision. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, "Hey, I want to go to a gas station," or "Hey, I want to go to a convenience store," but they do hundreds of millions of times a day, right? Going forward, I think what we would expect, we think, is that customers are going to be planning out their trips a little bit more frequently. They have to because of the range anxiety that Carol mentioned, right? So that's a very different opportunity to engage with customers, not just when they're at the site, but actually several hours ahead of time when they're making those decisions. So we've been investing a lot in our digital tools, upgrading our loyalty app in order to make sure that people can actually plan out their journeys in a much different way than they would in a fuel environment. Right?
Yeah.
Big shift for us.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a big challenge for our industry as well? In terms of, obviously we're talking about, we always as business people like talking about the opportunities, but it's quite challenging as well, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think what we've seen within Parkland is, even down at the individual level, some people take a look at this and they're super excited about the opportunity and they see change, they thrive on change, they really want to get after it. To Carol's point, nobody has this figured out yet anywhere in the world, but we're all trying to figure this out together. I think there's others that are quite comfortable in the way things have been for quite some time. It's a little bit more of a challenge to say, look, what you knew about fuel retailing and what you knew about convenience retailing is completely changing over the course of the next 10, 15 years, right? Some are excited, some aren't.
So, Carol, just thinking about, from your perspective as Shell, as an organization, what's critical, to implement, from your perspective right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple elements, right? I think one is absolutely leadership conviction, because it's a huge opportunity, but it's not going to be an easy journey. So how committed is, how passionate is the leadership? And then the second thing is that I also think that there is also a commitment to build up expertise. Because if you think about how do you get your charger to work, how do you make sure it's reliable, how do you build that physical, digital, I mean, these would take years or to get perfect. So it's the commitment to say, how do we also really make everything work for the customer and the customer end outcome? And then the last thing is what we mentioned earlier, is the whole learner mindset, because there's many different ways that the customer would charge. How do you make sure there's a clear learning about what is the best way, what is the best offer at that location that works for the customer? The motorway experience will be very different from the streetway experience, very different from the cinema experience. So the whole learner mindset to really figure out the solution, I think, will be key.
And I think what's interesting is that the expertise that Carol mentions is changing all the time, right? So I mean, I've had to remind myself and people at my organization that if you read something about EVs in particular, check the date on it, and if it's more than 6 months old, it may not be true anymore, right? So there's a lot of that even yes, there's an investment and expertise required, but we need to refresh that constantly because everything is changing technologically, policy is changing all the time, consumer expectations are changing all the time. It's not settled by any stretch, and it won't be for some time.
Yeah.
So Aaron, leader mentality, Gil Barco's perspective on that one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what comes to mind for me is nimbleness. That this is, I think, largely an industry over the last decade that's seen a lot of incremental improvements technologically. And I think we've already entered a point where that's no longer the case, and that how it's going to evolve, we don't know, but we know it's going to be more EVs, more alternative fuels, more consumer focused and technology following those consumers on their journey through the brand. So how that's going to evolve, I think we all can't have a crystal ball on that, but the nimbleness required and an understanding is going to change how we operate, maybe in the offerings we deploy.
Do you feel optimistic about the future?
Well, I think you can see from this show an optimism that there's enormous resiliency in the convenience store format. That's been for 20 years pretty much unchecked of growth through all economic cycles. I think we believe that's going to continue.
Yeah.
That's going to be a different environment 20 years from now in a different format, but it's going to be resilient because all companies like Shell and Parkland are here evolving, and the technology providers are going to evolve with them.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. We actually look at the future of EV and e-mobility, super exciting. Yeah. If you think about what does that mean for a company to establish leadership, but not only in the e-mobility space, right? If I think about convenience retail, this brought tremendous amount of opportunity for convenience retail when the customer have a much longer deal time. What do you do? What do you offer? How do you differentiate? I mean, this is super exciting, I think, for the whole industry.
You strike me as an optimist.
I am. I am, but you need to be, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And you are too, Scott?
Yeah, more opportunity than threat. That's been our mantra within Parkland. There's lots of opportunity here. It is going to change. We have no idea how it's going to play out, and it sounds like we're hearing the same thing here. None of us really have an idea of exactly how it's going to play out. But I'll echo what Aaron mentioned, that nimbleness is key. Getting out on the field of play is also key, right? So anybody in the audience that doesn't already have direct experience owning and operating an EV charging station, like that's the way to learn, right? We've learned so much even from our first locations, like our pilot locations we opened last year. There's no substitute for that. But more opportunity than threat for sure.
Yeah, I'll probably just add one thing, that as part of this journey, I think one thing would be absolutely critical is that how do you anchor on the customer? Because the customer anxiety expectation is so high, And then how do you anchor on that? How you're solving pain for the customer? How do you really adding the delight to the customer? So I think that as part of that journey, as far as you really anchor on the end result for the customer, I think that would be a really good path.
Yeah, I think that's a note. We always end up focusing on the customer, don't we? Look, this has been a great conversation. I think the mobility conversation continues, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, the learner mentality point is such a strong one coming through, isn't it? And, thank you very much for spending time with Shop Talk Live today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much,
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.